Good afternoon and welcome to our meeting today, an assessment of President Rouhani's visit to the United States. As you may have heard, the last round of negotiations did not go smoothly between Iran and the P5+1. My sense is that President Rouhani came to New York hoping that he will wrap up a deal and return to Tehran in triumph. But he was disappointed, and his last press conference before departure sounded quite pessimistic. The biggest stumbling block is the number of centrifuges. The Iranians want more than the 19,000 they have, while the P5+1 are apparently talking about a cap of 1,500, but it's open to negotiations. The Israelis, of course, as you know, want no centrifuges at all. I have no idea if President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif can convince the leader that a deal in which Iran gets less than its bottom line is still better than no deal. A deal will at least lead to a lifting of sanctions, which Iran wants, or partial lifting of sanctions. And in the end, the supreme leader will have to choose between sanctions, hardship for the people, and isolation, or a place at the table in the region. Zarif, in so many words, told an audience of senior American policy types last week when he spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations, and it was an open meeting on the record, that you either make a deal with us, or you will get another Ahmadinejad. He didn't mention him, but that was what he was pointing at. But this does not seem to have swayed the administration. But we still have 2 more months, and I, the eternal optimist, believe that a miracle can happen between now and November, and I will be able to win all the different bets I have made with different people. Everybody saying there is no deal, and I've said, yes, there will be a deal. Today, we have 2 top experts in the field helping us to understand what the implications of President Rouhani's trip has been, mostly domestically. You have their bios. Farideh Farhi, to my left, she's a former public policy scholar at the Wilson Center. She is currently teaching at the University of Hawaii, and she has written extensively on Iran and spent 4 months in Iran over the summer and the early fall. And Bijan Khajehpour, to my right, is the managing partner of Atiye International, which is a Vienna-based strategic consulting firm focusing on the Middle East. He is the co-founder of Atiye Group in Tehran, it's an organization founded in 1994, and he focuses on strategic consulting for Iranian and international companies, and comments on political and economic development in the region. Both of them will talk maybe each 15 minutes, and we will then open the floor to discussion. Farideh, you go first.
Thank you, Hale, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Since Hale mentioned her optimism, I want to tell everybody that in my, actually for the past year, I've been in Iran for almost 6 months. And I was there during when the November Joint Plan of Action was signed in Iran. And in these 6 months, I have yet to find a person who says that there will not be a nuclear deal. Everybody says Mishe. Whenever I tell them, that means it's going to happen. And I have no idea where that optimism comes from. But they are convinced, and it has to do with the fact, as I'll talk about it, the belief, the honest belief on the part of the Iranian population at least, that a systemic decision has been made to resolve this issue. And since that systemic decision has been made, it is going to happen one way or another. They are not going as far as trying to think about whether or not there is a systemic decision has been made in the United States, or the reality that the United States has a very difficult time making systemic decisions these days, or strategic decisions, but I'll talk about that in a second. Two pieces of news regarding Rouhani's trip to New York are worth mentioning at the outset. The first was the public report in Iran that he met with leader Ayatollah Khamenei for 2 hours before his trip. Now, this is worth mentioning because usually these kind of trips are not announced in Iran or not made public. But to me, they represent a concerted effort, public effort, to suggest unity at the top. The public representation of the two executives of Iran's political system. That's the reality of Iran. Iran is a two-headed executive system. Consulting and strategizing is a powerful signal regarding unity at the top, at least on the particulars of the nuclear issue. And the effort to suggest that if the nuclear talk is not going well, is not because of lack of unity or opposition of hardliners or even Mr. Khamenei himself, but what has come to be known in Iran as ziyadeh khahi of Iran's interlocutors. That is to say, the Americans wanting too much. The second signal of unity was on the day Rouhani was about to depart. Again, he reiterated, accompanied by his first vice president, and Mr. Khamenei's chief of staff, Ayatollah Golpaygani, who happens to be Rouhani's very, very close friend. Rouhani pointed out that the nuclear options are either a win-win, something that he has always said, or lose-lose for both the United States and Iran. He said Iran will lose, but the assumption that the United States will not lose is also wrong. Again, something that he kept repeating here. And again, to me, another suggestion that, as a system, as a political system, the attempt is to portray a degree of unity no matter what happens, whether a nuclear agreement is reached or not. And my sense, like Hale's, is that Rouhani would not have come to New York City. And not necessarily, I wouldn't go as far as saying that he wanted to wrap a deal, but he wouldn't have come unless he did not think that an extra effort to push for the resolution of the Iran nuclear dossier is worth a try. And of course, I'm not sure either if his performance or the way he was received suited that purpose. The reality is that the Iranians continue to hope for a shift in the strategic thinking of the United States. Even if most of the Iranian leadership knows that given the U.S.'s highly contested terrain, shifts of any kind, but particularly in regards to Iran, are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to come by. Nevertheless, the events of the region and the rise of Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call it, has given Tehran yet another boost in its effort to try to convince the United States to move away from policies that in the Iranian discourse are identified as an American thinking that relies on force and pressure to change Iran's policies. As Rouhani said in his UNGA speech, the resolution of the nuclear issue will open the path for all sorts of multilateral cooperation in the region. I don't think he could have been any more explicit on this issue. And I don't think he would have said it. He would have said what he said without significant support from inside Iran. As you all know, Rouhani and his nuclear team have had sufficient domestic support to conduct serious negotiations within the frame of P5+1. But as the nuclear negotiations themselves have made clear, the tortured history of U.S.-Iran relations, as well as the history of progress in Iran's nuclear program, in spite of sanctions, have become stumbling blocks and will not allow Iran to accept just any deal. The same, of course, is true about the United States. In Iran, like in the United States, if a deal is agreed to, Rouhani, and ultimately the leader, Khamenei, who has to give the final okay on the nuclear agreement, must do so in such a way that the agreement does not undermine the narrative that they have carefully constructed to maintain support for the nuclear talks themselves. But the situation is a bit more complicated for Iran if there is no agreement. It is in the situation of a failure that the decision to reject the deal must also definitely be presented as the decision of a united political system, or what is called a nizam in Iran. Both executives of Iran's complex political system have vested interests in appearing united, even in the rejection of the agreement. Rouhani, because he will have to remain at the helm of the executive branch for the next few years and does not want an open breach with Khamenei to unleash opposition from hardline groups and security institutions, he needs Khamenei to govern effectively. Meanwhile, Khamenei needs Rouhani because in case of economic difficulties, which are bound to continue, he does not want to be held solely responsible for having made yet another mistake, similar to the support he gave to Ahmadinejad. It is true that Khamenei has made the argument or has taken the posture of "I told you so" regarding his skepticism about U.S.'s ability or willingness to strike a deal with the Islamic Republic. And he will use that notion of "I told you so" to serve as a protection. But his situation, he did the same thing in 2005. I'll explain that in a second. His situation is different from the previous negotiations with the E3 between 2003 and 2005, and the comparison is not fully apt. In those negotiations, Khamenei eventually took the "I told you so" posture, pointing out that he was from the beginning skeptical of positive results, even if he approved the talks themselves, because he said the talks were nevertheless worthy because they showed that the other side was not trustworthy and not interested in the resolution of the conflict, and allowed Iran to move on to different policies. But it's important to understand that in 2005, Iran was not facing the kind of sanctions and economic difficulties regarding the sustenance of the economy. Those things all happened afterwards. This time they are. Even if the failure of talks confirms his pessimism regarding the trustworthiness of Iran's interlocutors, particularly the United States, he will still need to maintain the support of Rouhani and his team of economic technocrats who are needed to keep the Islamic Republic afloat. In 2005, Khamenei managed the shift of policy with a completely new administration. With Rouhani, he's stuck for at least another 3 years or perhaps 7 years. Furthermore, no matter how Ahmadinejad's presidency is framed, it is ultimately the leader who is held responsible constitutionally and politically for his failure of guidance. Khamenei can say, as he has said, that various presidents listened to him, had various presidents listened to him regarding making Iranian economy independent of oil revenues, things would have been different. But not being listened to may even be worse than a failure of guidance. It's a failure of authority. As the person with the authority and responsibility to delineate the general policies of the Islamic Republic of Iran and their proper execution, these are constitutional words I'm using, it will be very difficult for him to shirk responsibility for the decision he has made about the direction of the country. As a former member of the parliament told me in one of my interviews, the more he is pushed to think about the enormity of his decision about the direction of the country, the more he is likely to take a decision that is least likely to further polarize and separate the key institutions of the Islamic Republic. Alternatively, the more he is pushed in the direction of thinking that Iran's interlocutors are intent in undermining or delegitimizing his office, the more defensive and reactive he is pushed to become. Meanwhile, there is no doubt and that the nuclear agreement will strengthen Khatami in the same way that the fulfillment of a campaign promise by any president in the world will strengthen his or her presidency. Even more importantly, it will eventually undermine a key argument in Iran that the United States cannot be trusted to make a deal with. Rouhani has said so, as I said, in his talk. U.S.-Iran relations will not turn immediately rosy, particularly if the agreement entails many hiccups in terms of removal of sanctions. But it will be very difficult to maintain the argument that engaging with the United States is harmful. As mentioned before, Rouhani said the same thing in the UNGA speech. None of this suggests that Iran's highly contentious political environment will disappear. I'll be happy to talk about the maneuvering that are already underway regarding the 2016 Majlis election in the question and answer period. But for now, let me just say that in the case of both failure and success of the talk, a return to an internal discussion, negotiation, and conflict over how to repair the wounds that were inflicted in the 2009 election, and recreating a state that is better reflective of the diverse population makeup of Iran and sentiments of the country, and ultimately establish a less chaotic political and electoral process will have to begin. They actually have already begun. They never end anyway. The Ahmadinejad's era demands this and poses challenges as well. On the one hand, the policies and populism that took the Islamic Republic towards a cliff has generated a broad alliance within the Islamic Republic's political class that is cognizant of the need for a change of direction from the cliff by sidelining the folks that are not called, they used to be called hardliners, they're not, or those who go fast. Now they are directly called extremists in Iran. On the other hand, it has also created, that's the reality of Ahmadinejad's era, a number of people who benefited from Ahmadinejad's control of the state and will undoubtedly resist change. Just to give you an example, Minister of Petroleum in Iran, Bijan Zanganeh, said that from 2005 to 2015, the number of people employed by the oil industry, NIOC, NIGC, and so on, increased from 140,000 to 240,000. Vice President for Resources, Human Resources, said that, gave similar numbers in regards to the number of people who are actually working for the state or are retired and therefore the state has to pay a retirement. He gave a number that was just astounding in terms of budget. He said that percentage of amount of money that had to be put aside for current expenses of the state had increased from 66% of the budget to 86% of the budget in 2013. A trend completely in opposite to the direction that happened during Khatami's era. Let me just end by just making a personal observation because my time is running out. For all it's worth, let me just say that I do not personally worry about Rouhani becoming a new version of Khatami, whatever that means, because I personally would love to have another version of Khatami. I thought his presidency was a pretty good one, so I don't know when people talk about we don't want another fake presidency, I don't know what they mean. But nevertheless, I do not think that what the people worry about, which is an emasculated presidency, for this simple reason that Iran is in a different place than it was a decade and a half ago, 16 years ago. I acknowledge that the comparison exists if one thinks of Iran as a static place with its population and political forces having no ability to learn and adapt to changed circumstances. But we are dealing with an Iran today in which its reformists acknowledge that they made a mistake by demanding too much from Khatami and effectively undermining him with their constant challenges and criticism, ultimately opening a big hole into which the hardliners stepped into. They also claim that they have learned from the calamity, Ahmadinejad, that their disunity brought. They are promising not to do the same thing even with the centrist Rouhani after years of reflection regarding the mistakes that they made during the Khatami era. We are also dealing with an Iran that has experienced, as I suggested, 8 years of reckless Ahmadinejad presidency. Even conservatives dread the return of managerial incompetence. They have also learned. And of course, the Iranian population, watching in shock and awe its neighborhood inflamed due to externally manipulated, even if not caused, internal divisions, has learned. For Rouhani to become Khatami too, the intensity and nature of demands on him should also be the same. They are not inside Iran and not after what the country has gone through. It is true that Rouhani faces a conservatism intent on maintaining the status quo. And at the core of this conservatism is a security-minded establishment and judiciary that thinks most of the changes or any kind of change or thinks of change as a slippery slope towards the downfall of the Islamic Republic. It is also true that the damage that was done in the 2009 election still remains a big sore that Rouhani has been unable to heal, mostly due to the leaders' intransigence. But Rouhani is not without resources and point of view or strategy to engage in a good policy fight. In some areas, he will undoubtedly lose, and in other areas, he will win and push Iran in a different direction, as he has already done in foreign policy. I do not believe that even with a defeat or without a deal, that Iran's policy of engaging in the neighborhood will change. You will have a different kind of foreign policy than during Ahmadinejad's. The failure will not bring a different foreign policy. In other words, without a nuclear agreement in hand, Rouhani's mission as a moderate to sideline the extremists will undoubtedly become more difficult, but not impossible. In case of a failure to reach an agreement, the domestic fight over Iran's direction has to be settled before Iran's relations with the United States are addressed again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Farideh. Bijan?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here. I think this is the first time I'm here without a prepared presentation. That shows how fluid the situation is. But I hope you can follow me. I will address the question, which is the impact of Rouhani's visit, but more look at the economic impact and some of the economic developments in Iran. I think if we go back a year, I think we were here a year ago saying what can we expect from President Rouhani. We very clearly identified a year ago that there were 3 areas where he would focus, because these were the areas where he had operation or room to operate or room to maneuver. One was economic policy, one was nuclear negotiations, and one was international relations. And I think if we ask ourselves what was the main motivation for, and also another thing we said last year was there is usually a 12 to 18 month period for new presidents who basically benefit from the momentum of an election, especially if it's an unexpected election, and that momentum will die. Remember that we said 12 months ago, it's that momentum will die if there is no new momentum or no new reason to be optimistic. Right now, as Farideh said, there is a lot of optimism inside Iran because there is an expectation that there will be a nuclear deal. But the government, especially President Rouhani himself, had to cater for a situation where there is no deal and create new momentums. Now, when you focus on his trip, there were 2 elements that were very important. Apart from everything Farideh said about the nuclear negotiations and the potential push for it, one was economic data. President Rouhani used every single interview and every single opportunity to remind everyone that his government has actually turned the economy around, which is true. Iran has come out of a recession, 2-year recession. The last 2 years of Ahmadinejad, where Iran experienced minus 6% economic decline and then a minus roughly 3%. Now they have turned it around. This year, the expectation is that it will be a 2 to 3% growth, and then next year even up to 5% growth. And Rouhani even mentioned that in one of his interviews, that in the spring of this year, the economic growth, annualized economic growth was 4.7%. So economically, something positive is happening, and they have to obviously use this data, and I will share some of the data with you to create that momentum we were talking about. The second opportunity in New York for Rouhani and for the Iranian government in general was to show how Iran's international stature has changed since Ahmadinejad. In fact, if you go to the various Iranian news sites, you will find a lot of pro-Rouhani sites comparing the visits of Ahmadinejad to New York to the visits of Rouhani to New York. And then one thing they do is they compare the different heads of states that they met, and they list, and they have even clear lists. And Rouhani met UK Prime Minister David Cameron, and then so many Western leaders, and so on. And then Ahmadinejad, whatever, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh and Venezuela, and so on. So it's even on that level, they are trying to compare that. Obviously, Iran's international position has changed, and we know it's true, it has changed. And this is, again, another way of communicating to the people that things are changing. Iran is becoming internationally much more acceptable, and so on. But then when you look at it this way, you will immediately ask the question, then why was he so tough in his speech, in his UNGA speech? Well, that's the other side of the story in Iran. Whatever you do internationally, yes, you have to think about the publicity effects inside your country and with the different audiences, but you also have to think about how your opponents domestically will try to use your speech and your event against you. So Rouhani could not come here and project a position of weakness that we are so desperate to get this deal and the Iranian economy needs it. No, he was here to project a position of strength. And that position of strength was exactly this whole notion of what's happening in our region was the work of Western intelligence companies, intelligence organizations, and hence they need to rethink, and also, obviously, as Farida said, to offer Iran's constructive role in that scenario. To show you that Iran or the Iranian government is actually trying to keep options open and basically be prepared for both scenarios, I just want to also talk about what's happening between Iran and Russia. I think it's very important. I remember on one of the meetings I was here, I told you a new relationship with Russia is the plan B. If there is no deal, Iran would get closer to Russia. The fact is, well, before it's clear whether there will be a deal or not, Iran got closer to Russia. They signed a trade agreement to actually multiply the bilateral trade by 10. So the plan is to go from the current trade of $1.5 billion to $15 billion within 2-3 years, not within a decade, within 2-3 years. And that includes Iranian oil deliveries to Russia, Iranian food exports to Russia, but also a lot of imports from Russia. And as I said, we could ask ourselves, why did Rouhani or why did the Iranian government do this? Why didn't they wait for the deadline? Well, I think personally, I think it was a very intelligent move. One, because it sort of contained some of the criticism from inside Iran, from the opponents, who were saying, well, this nuclear deal is all about Iran becoming dependent on the Western countries again. And this we don't want. They kept reminding everyone that Iran should not sort of fall into this trap of too much dependency on Western economies, Western governments, and so on. So a strategic axis with Moscow was one way of saying, no, that's not the case. We are interested in improving ties with Western governments, but we are not dependent on them because we also have Russia, we also have China, and others. This was one significant impact. I think the other significant dimension of this deal is to also win Russia's support for the nuclear negotiations. Don't forget, Russia is also at the same table. And now Russia being sanctioned and Russia being pressured by Western governments, the Russians may ask themselves, what is in it for us if there is a nuclear deal? If Iran is going to fall back into sort of growing trade and investment ties with Western countries. So giving Russia a piece of the cake right now, even before there is a deal, I think was strategically intelligent and was part of this game to say, well, we have different options. We are not going to go and fall into a sort of, as I said, a dependency relationship with Western countries. And the third element, I think it was one way of showing that if there is no deal, it's not going to lead to a collapse of the Iranian economy. The misperceived calculation that was here for years when they were increasing the levels of sanctions, I think is now clear that it's not going to happen. And I personally have said that before as well. I don't think no matter what happens, there will be, we will not go back to the situation as it was in mid-2013, before there was an interim deal and before there was the Rouhani government. So let me share some indicators with you. I think it's important to know. First of all, the biggest success story for the Rouhani government is containing inflation. When Rouhani took office, the annualized inflation figure in Iran was 42%. Last year, August, was 42%. The latest quarterly calculation with annualized figures shows an annualized inflation of 25%, actually 23%, sorry, 23%. And if the trend continues, by the end of this Iranian year, March 2015, the annualized inflation will stand at about 16%. And that's a huge success in an economic environment that we have in Iran with subsidy reforms. Don't forget the second phase of subsidy reforms started in April of this year, so there are more inflationary pressures, and with all the different issues, corruption, sanctions, and so on that Iran has had. So this is one important figure. I mentioned GDP growth. GDP growth, the government has managed to turn the economy around, and part of it is because of that excitement and this momentum that the Iranian business community has, and also the international business community has, about a potential deal. So there are some movements, initiatives, investments that are actually moving in that direction, hoping that there would be a deal. The other success story, relative success story, if you put it into the Iranian context, is unemployment. Unemployment in the final year of Ahmadinejad peaked at 14%. This is a seasonal unemployment rate of 14%. This was the first quarter of the last Iranian year, which was, as I said, the peak. In the last 4 quarters, so in the last year, unemployment has sort of hovered around 10.5%. So you can see again the impact of the momentum of more rational government policies, economic policies, and there is a demographic push for unemployment because the population is young, but the government is trying to manage that. There are a number of other indicators. I can go into more details if you have time later, but I want to just close with this 2 scenarios. Scenario 1, there is a deal, and I remain optimistic, similar to Hale, that there will be a deal, even though the deal may actually be a phased plan, that you say they may even call it a comprehensive plan of actions rather than the original joint plans of actions, that there are different benchmarks, and if you achieve the benchmark, you move to the next one. So I hope that there is enough creativity within the diplomatic teams to achieve that. if there is a deal, it will obviously unleash a major boom in the Iranian economy. You already see the first signs of it, not just because some of the Iranian funds will be released or some sanctions will be lifted, but simply because there is just so much, and I hope Farideh can confirm that from her trip, so much entrepreneurial spirit right now in Iran. And with or without a deal, this energy is there. Obviously, if there is a deal, it will unleash a major development. But if there is no deal, and it's important to understand, it doesn't mean that the Iranian economy is going to collapse. Obviously, this phase of negotiations and the new government and all the different policies have paved the way for greater activity. If you also look at some of the trade figures, I looked before coming here, I looked at the European Union's exports to Iran in the first 6 months of 2014 compared to the first 6 months of 2013. They have gone up 11%. 11% without a much significant sort of lifting of EU sanctions. There were lifting of some insurance and some sort of banking sanctions, but the real sort of trade sanctions are there. So you can see that even within the current sanctions regime, there are opportunities to do more. Obviously, there has been over-compliance with sanctions, and this period has opened some doors. So if there is no deal, Iran will focus. I fully agree with Farideh that they will also have to have a domestic unified picture for that, but then they will go back to all those statements about resistance economy, about increasing domestic capacity, and about cooperating with nations that are happy to cooperate with Iran, including Russia, including China, and potentially including some of the regional players. So, and one thing Iran will do, and I want to close with that, is look more and more at what they call triangle solutions. So Iran, in the scenario that there is no deal and the sanctions will stay, and maybe there will be attempts for new sanctions, Iran will shift some of its potential to the neighbors. Iranian gas is already flowing to some of the neighbors, and there are contracts for Iranian gas to flow to Iraq, to Oman, to other countries. So Iran will start looking at Omani companies who are prepared to take Iranian gas and produce something together with an international company or a joint project in Iraq and so on. So they will try to realize some of the economic potential through indirect ways. That's, I think, that gives us a bit of a picture. Obviously, there are a number of geopolitical issues that will also have an impact on these decisions. But I'll stop here and look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Question to both of you. Let's start with you. The red line. All we know is that the supreme leader sets red lines, and he has talked about it openly. So can you elaborate a little bit what his red lines are when it comes to nuclear negotiations?
First of all, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that that red line is not individually generated. I think that's why I talked about the history of the progress of Iran's nuclear program. I mean, it's very important to understand that Iran's nuclear industry now employs something like 16,000 people. And these are scientists, these are students that come out of Iran's best universities. They are an interest group. They are the ones that are interested in continuing projects. They are interested in making sure that Iran's program, the progress that has been made, and so much has been made out of it, and do not go out of the window. So it's important to understand the context. Iran's red line in 2005, if we go back to the offer that Mr. Zarif put on the table, that presumably at that time Mr. Khamenei agreed to, if we can get that deal, we would be very happy today. Very, very centrifugal. So that red line is connected to the progress of Iran's program. And from what I understand, it is a kind of red line that has been generated on the basis of two things. First of all, the Iranian public discourse, that the main components of Iran's program will not be dismantled. And that term dismantled itself is something that came out of the negotiations. That is to say, as the American negotiators came out, and remember they came out with their white paper immediately out of, as soon as they used the word dismantled in it, that Iran's program, and that generated a reaction inside Iran. So keep in mind that when we are talking about red lines, these are red lines that are constantly shifting. And I think at this particular moment, the dismantling of any centrifuges that produce 5% is something that has become a red line. Then there is the question of negotiations over the future of Iran's program, and I think that's less drawn in stone. But simply, asking Iran to freeze its program or limit its program for 20 years, it just sounds so unreasonable within the context of Iranian frame that, they cannot sell it back. What do you mean 20 years? In 20 years, we will all be dead. Certainly Mr. Khamenei may not be around or will not. So, I think, and when he used the term, 190,000, he did not lay out any time frame for it. But, what he did lay out were these two elements that, essentially we want to move in a direction that will allow us there and, understand that we operate within this context.
Bijan, how do you understand the red lines given the economic situation of the country that Mr. Rouhani inherited from his predecessor, and also knowing that the supreme leader is not terribly happy when the current government starts criticizing more than a certain degree the economic performance and corruption under their predecessor?
I think if you focus on the economic interest groups, you have to say Mr. Khamenei is in this very unlucky position of continuously dealing with all these different interest groups and continuously trying to find a solution that can address them. I mean, having 16,000 people in the nuclear industry means that this is an interest group. This is all it's not just the individuals, it's all the companies, all the interests, all the material they're producing, all the financial transactions around this. And this is just one player. You have companies and industries that are concerned about the opening of the Iranian economy. On the other side, you have merchants and companies who are very much looking forward to the opening of the Iran. So I think Khamenei's red line within the sort of economic interest group scene will be not to lose the confidence of those interest groups that are closer to him, whether it's on a national security / economic dimension, the Revolutionary Guards, the entirety of the network around the Revolutionary Guards, some of the other interest groups that exist. So I think when he makes some of these remarks, and I fully agree with Farida that there are different dimensions and different factors that play into this calculation, this strategic calculation. But when Khamenei makes a statement, he's trying to consider all the different interest groups. And some of these interest groups are not very transparent about what they want and how they want Iran to develop in the future. So we have to take that into account and know that there are dimensions that we are not seeing. On another level, I think, and Mr. Khamenei has stated that very clearly, he doesn't want the nuclear deal, a potential nuclear deal, to be understood as Iran being weak. This is very important. For him, Iran has to remain a strong player. Iran has to project strength, might, and that is important for him. And he doesn't want this nuclear deal to be a sort of path towards normalizing relations with the United States. For him, that is a red line, and he has said that. I think these are the red lines that Rouhani has to work with.
Can I add something? And I think it's a very important point that Bijan just made. I think just talking to some people about the deal and the implications, the domestic, it's also very important for Khamenei, not only for Iran not to look weak, but also his office not to look weak. And I think that is something that is also shared by Rouhani as well. I mean, it's very important to understand that. And in fact, his Minister of Intelligence, Mr. Alawi, actually said so explicitly. He said that Rouhani went and talked to intelligence ministry's officers and essentially told them that if deal is made, okay, the credit should go to the office of the leader. If this deal fails, I will take the responsibility, because it is not to the interest of Iran for the office of the leader to become weakened at this point. So it's very important to understand the complicated dynamics that are involved and how, because the office of the leader is considered to be the pillar of the Islamic Republic, that when we are talking about not weakening of the Islamic Republic and projection of power, is also, we are actually also talking about some sort of consolidation and strengthening of the office at this particular moment. Now, over the years, you know, because that office can delegate power constitutionally, it's possible for the supreme leader to delegate all its powers to other institutions. It's actually written in the Constitution. You know, that weakening may take the form of reduction of the authority of the office. But that is something that may happen in the future. But at this particular moment, it's very clear to all the players that at least I talk to that this deal cannot make his office look weak. This notion that Khamenei is about to drink the poison chalice, you know, that people, particularly in the opposition outside, you know, have been playing with. It's something that is not domestically played out. And people do not think it's a good idea. Somehow, because Khamenei is not in the same position that Khomeini was, that could drink the poison chalice and still, you know, be okay, because in any case, Khomeini was gone, you know, in a few months, you know, in a year or so. Mr. Khamenei is going to hang around and face the decision that he has made. So it's very important for that decision to be accredited to his office in a way that legitimizes his office further.
Bijan, do you want to add
No,
something?
no, I agree. I agree.
Okay, yes. Just wait for the mic, please. It's coming. Thank you.
Alan Kieswetter with MEI and Denton's. I have a question for Bijan and for Farida. For Bijan, I listened to Rouhani's speech. In fact, I listened to it twice, obviously in translation. But I came away with the impression that he was tough on ISIS and that part of it. But on the negotiations himself, he was sort of hopeful. It's all being negotiated, and he sort of separated the two. And for, I like your impressions. And for Farida, you mentioned that the Supreme Leader expects to be around for a while. Does this mean that his recent hospitalization hasn't set off a lot of speculation and struggles for a succession?
I agree. I mean, Rouhani was tough on ISIL, but he was also tough on the Western policies that created ISIL. And I think what he said would echo very, very strongly across our region, that there were some miscalculations, and especially intelligence failures. And in the meantime, President Obama has also, I think, admitted that the intelligence agencies underestimated ISIL. So that's when I said, I mean, it was a speech that I can tell you the hardline Friday prayer of Tehran actually praised. That usually doesn't happen.
Praised with
Yeah,
gusto.
with exactly.
I mean, you couldn't get better than that. What happened to Mr. Khamenei's illness or surgery, whatever, was actually very interesting. It was actually quite unprecedented when he was going to the hospital, he gave an interview saying, he asked people of Iran to pray for him. And then after he came out, and, there was a parade of people going and visiting him. First one being Mr. Rouhani, second one Mr. Rafsanjani, which was very important. But it actually delineated the constitutional order of Iran. It wasn't, so all these talks about Rafsanjani and everything losing power, essentially, they made sure that they followed the protocol in all those meetings. And then afterwards, of course, he gave an interview again, which he never does, individual interviews. So it was a very, very choreographed event from the minute it happened. Because of that, the conversation is about the choreography and not Mr. Khamenei's health. So what the choreography was about, is it about Iran changing and the reality of these dual executive powers coming onto display rather than, the surgery was a small one, and I don't, it could have been, the possibility could have been that, people might have started thinking, and as some people did, well, are we going to be better off if he's gone right now? And the answer was no, we are probably not better off. We really do need somebody at the top that manages all these conflicts rather than having nobody, no matter who that person is. So it could have created, it created that conversation, but it really didn't, people didn't start thinking about, okay, who's going to be next, That conversation will happen soon enough because there has to be an election in the Council of Experts, and because the current leader of Council of Experts is in coma, there has to be a decision about who's going to be the next one. In all likelihood, it's going to be Mr. Hashemi Shahrudi. And, for a while, there has been some sort of discussion that he will probably be Iran's next supreme leader. There is really no other one that people have talked about. So maybe because of that, there is really no discussion. But I think it's mostly because the choreography took over the conversation about Mr. Khamenei's health.
Yes, please.
Thank you. It's Dana Marshall with Transnational Strategy Group. Thanks very much to Bijan and the other speaker. My question is on the view in the circles in Tehran that are really looking at the end game here over these next couple of months, specifically on the degree of cohesion that they see transatlantically on these negotiations. Let's set aside the two of the P5 that are sort of already doing a lot of work, and Bijan pointed out much more in store for Russia. But on the European side, does Tehran think that up to the end, the U.S. and the EU are going to be holding hands and either walk out the door together or do a deal together? How do they see that, and how do they play that?
Can I answer that? I can tell you that the strategy in Iran, the strategists around the Iranian government, not just the government, also National Security Council and so on, that they do believe that it could be a scenario for Iran to try to improve relations with the EU even if there is no deal. They are obviously also slightly supported, not slightly, probably extensively supported by what's happening with Russia, because we should not underestimate the anxiety in Europe about gas imports from Russia. about the potential of Iran, medium to long-term potential of Iran to become a major gas supplier to the European Union. And I can tell you that there are the smaller members of the EU, small to medium-sized members. I mean, if you say the E3 are the three largest players, almost all the other players are very unhappy about what the E3 is doing in these negotiations. You can also identify that on the sort of types of delegations and companies that are going to Tehran right now. I mean, there is a lot of, if you want to call the marginal European Union states, companies are traveling to Iran and trying to do business. As I said, especially focusing on where there are no sanctions right now, and there are quite enough areas where there are no sanctions, and if you can manage the banking issues and the insurance issues, you can actually do business. So the Iranian perception is that if there is no deal, and if Iran can manage to communicate that the deal failed not because of our conduct, but because of exactly the term that Farideh used, the fact that the Americans wanted too much this deal, then that they can go to Europe and sort of restructure the relationship with the European Union. I know that when you talk to the diplomats on the Western side, they say, well, there is a lot of unity, but I can tell you that the geopolitical realities have changed. And if we go back to some of the motivations for the European Union to join at that level with the US about 5-6 years ago, some of those motivations are not there anymore. There is no threat of an imminent Israeli attack on Iran. You know, I know I'm in Europe. I talk to a lot of European diplomats. I know that one of the reasons for the Europeans to join at that level was to prevent a war. Are we in a similar situation today? So we have to watch, but this is the perception on the Iranian side.
Farideh, you want to add something?
Just 2 points. I do not know whether or not they will actually be able to implement it, but I want to confirm what Bijan says. I mean, Rouhani has said repeatedly that we have not put all of our eggs in one basket. They have also said that, he has also said that the earthenware of sanctions is broken. We are not going to go back to the same situation. In New York, he also said that if the negotiations, he even implied, conversations between the United States and Iran will continue despite the breaking. So, the belief that Iran, that Iran's foreign policy has changed, and because of that, the attitudes outside will also change and has also changed. And this notion that this Iran phobia is, it has been broken or is about to be broken, gives them the sense that there are other options that they can pursue, and they will pursue. Whether they're going to be successful or not, it also very much depends on the kind of will that exists in the United States, political will, to go and, pressure other countries to pursue the sanctions regime in a ferocious manner or let it go. Because as you all know, sanction regimes work and are maintained if you continuously, tighten, the screw. If you do not do that, they slowly begin to fall apart. Not totally, but they loosen up. So it all also depends how these negotiations fail and how angry the main interlocutors are in relationship to each other. It's not merely that they fail, but how they fail as well.
The lady here, yes.
Hi, Nasim Kurosh with the Baha'is of the United States. I wanted to ask about the human rights situation in Iran. Bijan, you mentioned last year, we discussed there were 3 dimensions that we would be watching Rouhani on, things that he had kind of made a priority, the economic situation, foreign policy, and of course, the nuclear deal. But he had also campaigned on, at least partially, on a platform of human rights in Iran, or what he called, improving citizens' rights in Iran. But many of us in the NGO community have seen that in the last year, the situation for human rights has actually worsened, you know, whether it's the persecution of ethnic and religious minorities, the crackdown on journalists.
Please.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, in light of that, how do you see, you mentioned two possible scenarios, deal or no deal. How do you see the human rights situation playing out under each of those?
I have also said before, and I still believe the same, there is unfortunately a reverse relationship between external opening and internal clampdown in Iran. And what part of what we are seeing today is a reflection of that. So the regime makes a decision to de-escalate externally, to resolve the nuclear issue, to improve relations with the world. And again, because they don't want to seem weak, they think, you know, the type of treatment that we have seen towards dissidents and towards minorities and so on would mean that they are in a position of strength. This is the way they see it. This is one dimension of it. The other dimension of it is that, President Rouhani doesn't control the institutions that deal directly with these issues, especially the judiciary. And it's an instrument by his opponents to actually embarrass him, to undermine his policies and so on. Now, if we ask that question, you know, if there is a deal, unfortunately, this sort of domestic clampdown will continue for a while, but then there will be a new dynamics because, as Farideh clearly explained, if there is a deal, it will consolidate the position of Rouhani and also relax the position of Khamenei, and that will, over time, lead to also domestic relaxations. If there is no deal, and I liked how the Farideh said, if depending on how it fails and how angry everyone is, it may actually, if there is no success externally, it will actually also relax the situation internally, because then they don't have to project their strength through internal maneuvering. But it's very dynamic. I would just wait and assess the situation and look at the behaviors of the diverse institutions in Iran.
I want to add this, you know, about human rights situation in Iran. I consider it to be a lot more complex at this particular moment than just simply saying that human rights situation in Iran has worsened because the number of executions have increased and so on. Something very fascinating is going on at different levels. I don't know, are you following what is happening with the rejection, you know, university exams with Baha'i students in Iran? For the first time in Iran, this is a public conversation in Iran. That is, so on the one hand, you have students who have taken university exams and have been accepted at the university level, getting rejected because they are Baha'i. But they are writing letters and saying, nowhere in the way we are taking the exam, we actually say we are Baha'is. How do you know? You know, on what basis are you rejecting? And they are actually going to the parliament as Baha'is, not denying, and having a conversation about this issue. Now, this is why it's so fascinating to me, because on the one hand, this is exactly what you see. You see the judiciary engage in erratic executions, and you know, some of them totally heartbreaking in terms of political dissent and so on. And of course, they have always been erratic in relationship to drug dealers and so on. And then on the other hand, you have this very much more open public conversations in the newspapers inside Iran. This is not something that is coming from the outside. Is variety of groups inside Iran making a claim and opening the conversation. So it's a fascinating dynamics for me, because I cannot think of it as political closure, because it's not. It's human rights violation in combination with political opening. It's a very weird. To just give you another example, it used to be during Ahmadinejad's presidency that you could not put Mr. Khatami's picture in any newspapers. It was against, you know, they would shut down your newspaper there. Today, Mr. Khatami openly is identified as a seditionist in Kayhan newspaper. They call him a leader of sedition, okay, that is not in prison. that leader of sedition that is not in prison. Sometimes they actually say Mr. Rafsanjani is also among the 4 leaders of prison. But at the same time, you also have Mr. Khatami giving interviews, being, going to public events, engaging. So that is happening at the same time. It did not used to be the same in Iran. When Kayhan accused somebody of sedition, as it had consequences, as both Khaleh and Bijan can tell you. So so I think it's a very complicated dynamic that is going on in Iran that one needs to acknowledge and try to understand without undermining the reality or making a case that these major human rights violations are not, are going on.
Let me have a follow-up to that question, a question put to both of you. Mr. Rouhani was well aware when he ran for the presidency of the limitations that he will face when it comes to limiting the power of the security institutions and also getting involved more than a certain degree with human rights issues. Why did he campaign on it? Why did he make these promises? Somebody
It's
who was
obvious. Why do politicians make promises?
No,
Because it
but-
wins
but-
them votes,
But
and
then
it
he
did.
wasn't able.
No,
to
but I mean,
deliver,
he became
know.
president. I mean, 73%. That's the bottom line. I mean, did Mr. Obama, close Guantanamo? No, he didn't, and he should have known that he, once you get into power, you should know. But you make
So
those
why
promises.
should the people then trust him when it comes to human rights issues? Why should people then think
Well, it's
that?
just.
Just wait, let me
Yeah.
finish. Sorry. Why should people then think that if there is a deal, he would be able eventually to maybe control some of the excesses that is happening? I mean, look, the arrest of Jason Rezaian, and I feel I have to talk about him at every meeting on Iran because I think it really, although Mr. Rouhani denied it, it really was a step to try and undermine him, just like he was coming to the United States knowing that he will be faced with this question all the time.
I think I can't talk for Rouhani and say why he campaigned on something. But I think if we look at his position today, or even at the past 12, 13 months since he's in power, I think any president would have to pick his fights. And I think he decided to pick the fight in the nuclear issue and not to, fight on multiple fronts at the same time, hoping, and that's why this momentum I was mentioning at the beginning of my speech so important, hoping that if there is a deal, then there will be a much bigger momentum where then he can pick new fights. And that may be one of his fights in the future. But we should not underestimate the complexity of the power structure and the fact that each of these institutions will use the power they have to undermine new developments. I always say that in Iran, the power to disrupt is widely, spread across the different power centers. And most of these people, they cannot actually construe something. They cannot construct a new policy, but they can destruct it. They can, and this is what they do. They know that one arrest here, one statement there will actually completely deconstruct. And I have to actually congratulate the government because they have managed to continue some of these processes despite all of these attempts to disrupt them. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Mr. Rouhani did try, from what we understand, to get Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi released. Mr. Rafsanjani said so. And something happened. Something happened that, obviously, as Mr. Motahari said, went directly to the office of the leader. Okay, so that conversation began in Iran. Mr. Motahari even went to the leader and said, let's get these guys released. And he said if they get, if they go to court, their punishment will be worse. So everybody knows where this problem lies, exactly at the center. And Mr. Rouhani came out and told everybody, please be patient. Okay, I continue to maintain my promises, but be patient. Okay, now what is different today in comparison to the Khatami era is precisely what Bijan says, that Mr. Rouhani has come and said, I'm going to go and resolve this foreign thing, and then it's going to make it easier for me to come and resolve the domestic issues. And the people who used to complain last time are buying that argument. That's the difference today. That is to say, the reformists, the centrists, even some of the conservatives, they are accepting the argument inside Iran that patience is needed. Let's see what happens with this one. Now, one prominent editor told me that if this one doesn't, there's going to be a fight in Iran very soon, over all these issues. It's just that Mr. Rouhani will be located differently depending on how the result. If there is a deal, he will be standing next to Mr. Khamenei trying to manage the fight, he said. Both of them next to each other. If there is no deal, he will be down here, fighting with the other side. So, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I'm saying that the internal conversation is very cognizant of limitations and the promises that Mr. Rouhani has made.
You have the last question, please. Yes, you have been very patient. Thank you.
Greg Thielman, Arms Control Association. Thank you very much for your insights. One thing that's particularly puzzling to me is why the Supreme Leader used the 190,000 figure, whether it was centrifuges or separative work units. The point is, he said it. The Iranians are never going to get anything close to that in an agreement. And doesn't that fundamentally undermine the Supreme Leader himself if they get an agreement? Because that will be quoted back to him as a measure of how short they have fallen from what they need.
The sentence was very qualified. First of all, it was 190,000 so that is to say, it wasn't about centrifuges. It depends on the capability of centrifuges. So as a centrifuge, if there is an agreement that allows for more productive centrifuges, that becomes a possibility. Then he also said over time. So he never specified that it has to be in these negotiations. So there is a lot of room. What I do not think is negotiable at this particular moment is the dismantling of the 9,000 centrifuges that are spinning. And, I just couldn't get people. I kept telling people inside Iran, there's going to be a problem on this. There's going to be a problem. And, they kept saying, you mean the Americans are going to not have a deal over a couple of thousand centrifuges? I said, that's what they are saying. There is this agreement. Nah. That was the couple of thousand are you kidding me? There's so many, we have given so much, so many things, that's not, like I said, I think it's this notion of dismantling what already is spinning, I think it's a hard thing to sell at this particular point. Whether they can find a way to manage it and sell it in such a way that people won't notice, I don't know.
Just to confirm, exactly the day after that speech, Mr. Salehi, the head of the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization, came and explained all of these things. He said, first of all, he explained what this SWU was, and then he explained if you use the first generation centrifuges, this much, second generation, and then he said, we are also working on the third generation centrifuges, and if we have a third generation centrifuges, we just need something like 10,000. of these centrifuges to manage that. So I think they all tried to qualify and quantify it in a way that was not damaging to the nuclear negotiations. But again, this is another evidence of this continuous sort of bargaining process inside Iran. So what he was trying to, the audience he was trying to, or the constituency was trying to address was exactly the nuclear industry in Iran, to say we are not going to put an end to these developments, because the core sentence, in my view, in that speech was not the number. He said, eventually we will get to industrial scale enrichment in Iran. That was the core sentence. The number was just something that, because, and in Iran, that is possible for experts to come and say, we will achieve industrial scale enrichment through this type of a process, through this type of a 10-year plan, and then Khamenei will say, this is all I want. I want to know that we are getting there, getting to the end goal of industrial scale enrichment.
No.
Okay, then how important are these numbers for the average ordinary Iranian? Whether it's 19,000, 5,000, or 1,500. Your average Iranian, not the people who are in the...
I don't think, they have, like any political system, the key players here are the ones that are very much into knowing the numbers, and they make an issue out of it. But for Iranians in general, it's very, very difficult. I mean, a recent poll has come out and essentially suggested that the Iranians are divided on the question of nuclear agreement. But mostly, majority of the population want an honorable agreement, whatever that means. And, I think that's the reality of the situation in Iran. I do think United States has to understand that this sanctions regime has reduced American popularity inside Iran, even among, I come from a secular, extremely liberal background. The folks I hang around with, in my daily life are private sector people, doctors, engineers, their own businesses. And America doesn't look good to them either. They're pissed off. They're just saying America is asking too much. They are even saying that. Are they ever going to be satisfied? And it has become, I have to say that it became, I was in Iran when Gaza was attacked, and I have people coming, my sister was here for years, I say, this is not the America I know. What has happened to America? People talk to me like this, or, and then what has happened in Iraq and ISIS is just as I said, the neighborhood has freaked everybody out, and they have questions about American meddling, American competence, American, and then connected that to the kind of pressures that are on Iran after an election in which Iranians engaged heavily to select someone that they think is going to take Iran in, at least in a better path than before. Those are all bring all sorts of questions about populations. But numbers, I don't think,
Numbers are not.
Numbers are not.
Please join me in thanking our two speakers.